Yeah, old school. That's what I'm talking about. Listen, this ain't for everybody. Some of y'all need to hear this. I know you're in the trenches fighting, but check it out. I'm gonna put it down like this so I can help the saints understand. Everything you're going through is all part of the master plan. Or what? You thought cause you got saved everything was gonna be peaches and cream? You better wake up, son. Don't nothing come to a sleeper but a dream. Faith without works is dead. Read your Bible, you know what it said. He who don't work don't eat. Blackers don't get fed. Yeah, Jesus said he who puts his hands to the plow looks back the same ain't fit. Some of y'all ain't been in the trenches 5 minutes and you about ready to quit. I ain't mad at ya, I'm just hitting you with the real. If you died for me and I was still tripping, now how you think that make you feel? Check this out, deep game, this here's deep. Some of y'all ain't sawing nothing but you started trying to reach. But unto him who is able to possess your fathers by his glory. Struggles might be part of your testimony, but it ain't the end of the story. Now the point is this was prophesied way back in the day. Choir, sing your hook right here and see if the church can relate.
I know we can make it. Oh, we can make it. I know good and well. God can work it out. He'll work it out. Work it out. Yeah, he'll work it out. I know we can make it. We can make it. I know good and well. God can work it out. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Yeah.
Thinking not strange, the fiery trials wanted to try you. You say, why you? But your church say, what would Jesus do? Why you asking if he ain't trying to do what he's saying? He told you he was going to have tribulations, but you thought he was playing. 1 minute you're telling how good God is and can't nobody beat the talk. The next minute you're backsliding so fast, it's like you're moonwalking. Oh yeah, I'm preaching to myself because I ain't no better. It ain't like I've been following his every word, obeying it to the letter. But we soldiers, we got to remember that. Regroup, stay on point. Yeah, bow down, confess, repent, stay humble, let him anoint. It ain't easy as I thought it was. I'd be lying if I told you that. But it showed up getting better all the time. Trust me, that's the fact. Ain't nothing we going through that can't be handled. God put that on his son. Like they say, you can shout now if you want to, cause the battle's already won. So while you're going through the valley, don't even trip. You're gonna be on top. Choir, sing the hook line one more again. This time you don't stop.
I know we can make it. We can make it. I know good and well. God can work it out. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. He'll work it out. We can make it. I know good and well.
Yeah, everyone, we're going to pump the brakes right there. I had to give a minute or two to Big Boy upstairs. It's my hope, and I hope it is yours as well, that with this help, we're going to be able to work this thing out called life. You're listening to Can a Player Play, and I'm your host, Lamont Patterson. And as usual, we have a fantastic show lined up for you, very informative, great guests with a lot of information to share with you. So sit back, let the windows down, turn the air conditioner up, get your pen and your notepad out, and prepare. It's going to be a lot of great information, and we definitely need your help, everybody's help, to make this place a better place for everyone. We're going to be talking about empowering climate action in the United States. Our guest today, Dr. Deb L. Morrison, who works at intersection of justice, climate science, and learning. She is a climate and anti-oppression activist, scientist, learning scientist, educator, mother, and locally elected official. I don't know what's wrong with me today. But anyway, also Mr. Tom Bowman, who is an advisor, speaker, changemaker, who believes that the solution to even the world's toughest problems are within our grasp. He's also a principal of Bowman Change, Inc. All right, so we're going to jump right into this thing. I know you guys are sitting around waiting to hear what we're talking about and how we're going to present it to you, and hope you can receive this message. Hello, everyone. Dr. Morrison, Mr. Bowman, are you with us?
We are here.
Well, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us today. We definitely appreciate your time.
Pleasure to be here back with you, Lamont.
Definitely a pleasure to have you, Tom. Definitely enjoyed you before, and I know you got some more great information. Dr. Morrison, are you with us? Hello? Well, I can't hear her. So, Tom?
Yeah, it sounds like a technical issue. She's been texting me that she's on, so hopefully we can get that worked out.
Okay. see here. Let me see if it's on our end. Dr. Morrison, are you with us?
I am here.
Oh, there she is.
Great to be with you here today.
Well, thank you so much, Doc, for joining us. Definitely appreciate you. All these, they say all man-made items are subject to failure. So.
All good.
We're going to put it on the technical things, but at any rate, we're glad you could join us. For the sake of our audience, I gave you a brief introduction. I'm sure I didn't do you justice, but for the sake of me and our audience, will you tell our audience a little bit about you?
Well, I am a learning scientist and have been working across the last 30 years in both sciences as an ecologist and working in the field in different ways in forest ecology, and then into learning and trying to understand from everything from working in middle school as an educator to research across the U.S. and globally to think about how we're teaching kids about climate and how we're working with communities around climate and climate justice.
Okay. That sounds like some exciting work. I'm going to ask you later on in the show how you get kids to pay attention to climate, because I know when I was a kid, all I wanted to do was play. It didn't matter if it was raining, snowing, or anything.
Yeah, and then there's lots of play to be had while you're learning.
Absolutely. Well, I'm sure you know better than that about me. Anyway, Tom, let me have you go ahead and give your brief introduction, and then we can get into these questions.
Sure. So I am a communication specialist. I've owned a exhibit design firm for about 25 years, working in marketing and education exhibits at museums and aquariums. And I learned climate science because of the work we did for some clients who were scientists, and it redirected my career. So I have experience in the small business community, in strategic communication about climate change, in decarbonizing businesses and operations, and things like that. So this collaboration with Deb, who comes at this from different directions but mutually complementary directions, has been really quite an astonishingly fruitful and exciting project.
Well, I guess it's definitely that it's now the time for it, because every time you turn on the television and listen to the news, that's one of the most important topics that we hear about is the climate.
Yes, it is.
So, guys, tell us, how did this book, Empowering Climate Action in the United States, and the report that it contains come to be?
Well, there's as many things. It starts with people sitting around and talking and sharing food and drink and thinking about what it is that we are struggling with in the world and what do we need to improve. And so a couple of years ago, many leaders in science education across the U.S. were sitting together and thinking and working and trying to understand how we're broadening the participation in this kind of educational leadership space with that sort of reflects deep and important work that's been going on in climate justice for decades and I would argue centuries. And so we try to think about who's at the table and who's not in these conversations, and how do we get more voices, particularly voices of those who are Black, Indigenous, other communities and people of color who are not necessarily being heard in those educational leadership spaces around it, science. How do we get them into the conversation and defining the conversation? And so that was the beginning of it, really just that question. And then, amazing support from folks like the Spencer Foundation and Dr. Megan Bang in that space to really pull together enough resources to be able to support participation. Most people volunteered their time, but we really wanted to make sure that, folks who are often overtapped and in BIPOC communities are really brought in with with money, like paid for their time and valued. So yeah, we brought folks together and just listened and documented and heard everything they said.
Okay, the ACE framework argues for the opposite approach. Can communities really lead in an effective response to climate change?
Deb, do you want to? I think you should dive in on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think communities are leading the climate response, and it's just a question of whether national leadership is hearing them or not. And so when we look at the work of long-time work of folks like Robert Bullard, Dr. Beverly Wright, Dr. Daniel Wildcat, others all across the nation, like we see that leadership has been there for a long time. And what we're not seeing is that that's not coming into learning environments. You know, it's really divorced from what we see going on in the classroom. And so that's what we really wanted to change with this, is think about how learning environments are really leveraging much of that work that's been going on for a long time in communities.
Oh, great!
I'd like to.
I was just going to ask you that.
Yes, thank you, Lamont.
Go for it, sir.
Yeah, I come at this from a different angle. That's not education oriented, and the question that has driven me is, how do we change our culture so that people feel engaged and empowered to start taking ownership of the climate crisis and creating the world that we all want to live in? And some of us who got involved in this project last year, who work in communication and activism and other spaces in addition to education and science and learning science and social science, is that we need to mobilize society. We need a whole of society kind of mobilization in order to make our communities more robust, in order to adapt to a changing world, and also to reduce the greenhouse gases that are causing the problem in the first place. So how do we do that? And a couple of really key things occurred. One is that there was a moment last summer when this project really came to fruition, came into focus, that people saw the possibility of a change in the presidential administration. We didn't even know who the Democratic nominee would be for president when this project was initiated, but there was a chance for a change, and all of the Democratic candidates were talking about making a major policy changes on climate change and rejoining the Paris Agreement and so forth. And so the question was, is there a way to seize this moment of opportunity by bringing people who work in different sectors, different professions, different geographies, very, very different locations and circumstances in their lives together, and find areas where we agree, disagree, but where we see opportunities to create a strategic alignment for greater collective impact quickly, not over decades, but over a period of months and years. And so there was that sense of timeliness and urgency in this work, in addition, as Deb rightly said, of recognizing and building upon the work that's been going on for decades at least in climate justice and in climate and environmental work more broadly.
Okay, very good. I just want to put out here for our listeners that just joined in, if you'd like to join the conversation, the caller number is 646-929-2870. Just press number 1 on your phone. Let us know that you're there, and we would be glad to let you join the conversation. Tom, I'm going to throw this and that out there to you. I think you may have touched on it briefly. Action for climate empowerment. You described it as being transformational. What makes it transformational?
Well, there are a couple of things that really come to fore in that question. The first is that we have been taught to think of climate change as something that's got to be solved in a top-down way, right? That's the way the federal government mostly works. It is a centralized there is a web of people in the federal government who work with local communities and stakeholders all across this country, but But the news media and our perceptions of the federal government tend to gel around the Beltway in Washington, D.C. And one piece of this that's so transformational is that it's bringing diverse leaders together who have been acting and working and learning for a very long time from all of these different walks of life together in dialogue. And the quality of that experience was in itself transformational, because it convinced me, certainly, and I think it convinced all of us, that the resources, the knowledge, the wisdom, the expertise, the energy that we have in this country is broad. It's everywhere. It exists in pockets in local communities everywhere. It often isn't as evident as big organizations are, because it's happening locally. As Deb said, that's where the heart and soul of this work is. And when you encounter other people who are in good faith, who are also doing this work in their own ways and in their own spaces, it creates a really transformational sense of your own empowerment, first of all, and our capacity to act collectively in ways that we hadn't been thinking of before. And I think for those reasons, inherent in that is that historically marginalized voices of people of color, of people with low incomes, of people who don't work in large organizations and have positions of authority in large organizations and governments, had just as much voice, just as much to contribute as those who have those positions. And that in and of itself really changes the game, and it convinced me, certainly, and I think it convinced many of us that this is exactly where we need to put our effort.
Right. Fantastic. Dr. Morrison, Tom, I think we may have a caller here. Let me see.
Yeah, and I just go by Deb usually.
Okay, Deb, I'm sorry. 504, you're on.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Great.
Fantastic. How are you?
Hey, this is Carlos Ringer. I just decided to join in to get the information, get some knowledge about it. I'm not really too up on climate change, but it's good to listen to see what's really going on.
Well, you have two professionals on the show right now. I could tell you everything that it is about climate change. So if you have any particular questions, specific questions, shoot them.
I certainly will. I've been listening, and they're very informative. So I'll just continue to listen.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in.
All right.
Deb, Tom, I got a question. It's kind of like out in left field, though. Why do you feel like it's so difficult to get people to focus in on the fact that we need to give more attention to the climate crisis?
I think that's actually shifting a lot now. I think it's more about the how we do it. Sometimes the challenge that you have is that it's such a big problem that people don't know where to start. And by thinking of this sort of action for climate empowerment thing, we think about, how do we break it down to the smaller problems of education or training or public awareness, and how do we, really look in community? Where are we already doing those things? How do we connect what we're already doing to that bigger climate question so that people can learn in the context of what they care about every day?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We tend to think of something as big and bold and broad as climate as a thing of its own, but we actually experience climate in many different ways in our lives, and we can act on climate change in many different aspects of our lives. And people are beginning to discover this more and more. So if you're working on environmental justice issues in your own community, you are working on climate already. The other thing that I'd like to note is that there's a real shift in this work away from the kind of thinking that we've been inculcated into us, that I have to figure out how my actions matter, and I feel small, my emissions are small, the climate is a global issue, and climate change is a global issue, so what difference does it make if I take action? the shift really is toward collective action, toward the collective capacity of all of us to act in collaboration with one another, but also that the actions that any one of us takes don't exist on their own. They're part of a trend. They're part of a movement to empower all of us and mobilize our actions together, which is how we have enormous power.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah,
Definitely.
and that collective, that collective sometimes is, maybe it's our family, maybe it's our organization that we belong to, or work, or our church, or, like all of those different types of places where we are and where we work with others. Those are that collective action space that we can engage in.
Oh, okay. Well, talk to us a little bit about finding justice-centered climate action.
Deb, do you want to start on this one?
Sure. So when you think, justice is also one of those super big words like climate. And what we understand as justice depends on where we live and who we're living with and surrounded by. And so sometimes that might be issues of racial justice or intersectional issues of racial and gender justice. Other times it could be issues of justice related to Indigenous rights. And so when we're thinking about, could be economics too. So when we're thinking about a particular justice issue, we kind of have to think in a really specific local. So like in my community, one of the issues of justice is about how we actually have affordable housing that's built in ways that are resilient to storms, that are energy efficient, but that are also economically feasible for people. And so that's an intersectional issue of justice that actually also connects with Indigenous rights to be here in this community and be able to live here. And so those types of things, building doesn't necessarily always, twig on people's idea of climate justice, but it is about climate justice because it's about how we construct using materials that are going to be sustainable in the broad idea of our community and produce energy efficient buildings so that we're, being able to live inside our boundaries as humans in space.
I'd like to give another example of it that came out of the framework, the book project, and the framework project that underlies it, and that is there was a discussion, especially among some of the people of color and the Indigenous participants, who said, government keeps setting goals for net zero emissions, and what that means is that by, let's say, 2050, we're going to have a target for let's say, zero net emissions. That means you can continue to emit carbon pollution in one place if you're taking it out of the atmosphere somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So you plant a huge forest and it's removing carbon dioxide, and so you can still have your crowded freeway running through the city or full of gasoline-powered cars and diesel trucks, or you can have a power plant that's burning coal. And those who find themselves living along the fence lines of those coal-fired power plants where the pollution is really high and the health impacts are terrible, or who find themselves living near the freeways that carry all the air pollution from those cars and trucks and have the negative health consequences. Those people tend to be lower income. They tend to be people of color, as I mentioned last week in all of Los Angeles and the city of Long Beach where I live. Those people were saying net zero is a bad target. What we need is actual zero emissions by 2050. Because that would require that we stop polluting in those neighborhoods where people are being disproportionately harmed already. And so this kind of justice-centered shift makes you say, okay, so if I'm privileged and I live in a wealthy community far from the source of pollution, and my model is net zero, that means that having the lifestyle I live is already creating harm for somebody else. If we're going to really have a just approach to climate solutions, part of that is to say, wait a minute, that isn't fair, right? That's unjust because those people who are disadvantaged don't have ways out of that disadvantage. So let's turn this model around and say if we have to achieve zero emissions instead, that means we stop the pollution that harms people who are being unfairly disadvantaged. That's a really powerful but also sort of specific shift in the entire framework in which we talk about climate change. And I think it's invigorating and empowering, even though a lot of people will be challenged by it, but it's really where we need to go.
Tom, let me ask you this. The city leaders or the political figures that's living in some of these same areas, I mean, are they quiet about this? Or what are they doing? Or are they hands tied?
No, they work on it in big and complicated. They see it as a long-term, complicated project. I gave you the example of Long Beach. We have the busiest seaport in the United States here,
right.
And so all those trucks carrying containers run up freeway through Long Beach, and so the pollution within, say, 1,000 feet of the freeways is far worse than it is anywhere else in town, right? And guess who lives there? So the city leaders can't solve it alone. They have to solve it with the port. They're trying to solve it with the state regulators that are requiring diesel trucks. There are all these studies of electrifying the trucks so that they stop the pollution. There are things that they feel that they can't control, such as why are we importing so many consumer goods that we throw away? Is that smart? From a sustainability framework, does that make any sense at all? And they are investing in more parkland, more tree planting, more other things to make those neighborhoods shielded as much as further from the impact of the pollution. What I don't see, however, is a genuine, the kind of community engagement and empowerment that the contributors to this framework process voiced, where you really do give the people in those communities leadership roles in making decisions for the city. Because if you did, you'd get different outcomes, right? And for example, instead of just planting trees to benefit those communities, there would be more investment in those communities that the people who live there would direct, so that they have more control, so they can build more robust economic foundation for themselves, so they can they're empowered to start enacting policy decisions to their benefit. And the structure of our city government hasn't really transformed its thinking in those kind of empowering ways yet. And I think that's a microcosm of what's happening in cities everywhere, right?
Yes. Yes, it is. Yes. This acronym, BIPOC, I find that interesting. Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. You guys wrote in your book, which you just happen to be white. How do you make sense of this apparent inconsistency?
Yeah. Deb, do you want to start on that, or shall I?
Yeah, I can start on that. So,
okay, Deb,
no, it's
for
fine.
it.
So, we were the writers of the initiative, but there was a huge collaborative that was involved in organizing and reviewing, and there's many different terms that words like the word America too, that were sort of named by reviewers. Most of the reviewers and many of the reviewers were people of color. And so trying to figure out how to have the capacity to write it, because of our privileged position, both Tom and I had time to be able to volunteer our time to do the writing. But at the same time, we understood our own positionality and needed to check it, check our whiteness. And so the reviewer panel had a look at that. And we wanted to constantly be able to name different different positionalities that were being really marginalized in these conversations. And so the BIPOC acronym that has been used in the last year or two, it was thought to be a broad enough sort of inclusion that Indigenous voices were or Indigenous positionalities were being named, as well as Black and some of the anti-Blackness work, or like naming that had gone on last year, and then and has long time been done. So it was an acronym that was kind of a consensus acronym used inside the report.
Yeah, I'll add to that our job wasn't to be the authors of this report. Our job was to do the best job we could of articulating in the language we heard it from the dialogues, from the participants in the dialogue, what their priorities were. And so our job was to organize. There were 4 multi-hour dialogues that involved 150 people or so, and we went through the materials, the summaries, the notes, the recordings. We listened to and participated in the dialogues and took our own notes as well. And our task really was to organize the input of the people who spoke, not to express our own perspectives. And obviously nobody is a neutral reporter. There's no such thing in this world. And so there were 3 robust rounds of review. The first draft was reviewed by the coordinating team that put this whole project together, and they went through line by line and issued comments, and we responded to every single comment and edited the draft accordingly. And then there was a round with about 20 strategic reviewers who were chosen for their diverse perspectives and positions in the world. They submitted, I think, roughly about 300 to 500 comments, line by line again, and we responded to each and every one. And quite often, their comments had to do with the framing of the language, and so we responded to that framing, and we reworded things and added notes for clarity when the wording might be misconstrued. And then this went out to a broader review that involved the wider network of the people, not only the participants, but the people who they shared it with. And they sent their responses line by line, and we had at least 500, I think more, responses from that round of review. And again, we did exactly the same thing. We went through the whole document, every single comment, and adjusted the document carefully and critically. I mean, there were some comments that would have sent the document off in a different direction, and so we were not able to include all of them. But we were very consciously made the decisions to include, for example, points that not everyone agrees with. But we say not everybody agrees with this, but here are the things people said. So that it's really not us as much as possible. And I think that the responses that we've gotten from the participants have been very enthusiastic, that they see themselves reflected they see their own views and voices reflected in this document. And, the less you see Deb and me, the better. The more you see them, the better. And I think the impression I get is that we were pretty successful in playing that role.
And maybe one more thing to add on to that is that the comment and review process that Tom just described, that was for the actual framework, which I think is chapter 4 of our book. But in the book, one of the things that we did intentionally to kind of make the book is really made to help the framework travel. And so in the book, one of the things we did was we actually really named those assumptions. So we actually named the use of the term BIPOC and the idea of like what aspects of different positional racism we're trying to uncover and make explicit by not just saying people of color, like by not just saying Black or not just saying Indigenous, by being much more sort of inclusive of different ways people experience racism as part of the aspect of racism that gets talked about in the framework.
Well, I definitely commend you guys on your dedication and persistence, because when I was listening to you speak, I was thinking about what point in time would I have cut and ran.
It's hard.
Well,
and I'm with you. There are times when, like in the position of being white and working in these issues of racism, it's owning your own, reproduction or complicity and trying to constantly interrogate that. And, Bettina Love did this so well in her book last year on, what was it? It was like, we need to do more than just survive. She talks about abolition teaching, and she talks about the way that we need to be constantly critical and reflective and humble in the face of the work. And, I don't know that we always are what we seek to be.
Yeah, I'd like to actually add one other comment too, and this is my own discovery in this work, and that is that as we advance in our professions, in our jobs, and our careers, we are all taught to establish ourselves as experts, to earn our stripes, to become experts in whatever it is we do. And as I started reflecting on that, because that's been my path too, right? I just turned 65, so I've been at this kind of work for a long time, and by now I tend to be regarded as an expert in a field. When you get into dialogue with a variety of different people of all ages, of multiple races, of very different backgrounds, of different who work in different professions, you can't help but discover that self-definition as expert is really, really problematic and misleading.
I can see that.
Yeah, because it tells us that my views matter and that my views should be normative for everybody else, and my views should be privileged and everyone should listen to me. And as I consider myself so fortunate. My role in the dialogues was to listen to them, take notes on them, not really contribute to them because I was going to write about them, right? So I was an observer, and as I observed, I discovered the phenomenal depth of knowledge and expertise and wisdom everywhere. And it challenges all, I think, to set aside this notion that I have some expertise that's supposed to be more important than someone else's. Because, in fact, everybody, you come out of these kind of dialogues and you want to say, man, just give all the power to these people and we'll be fine, right? I don't have to play that role. And so it really shifted, at least for me, it shifted the nature of this project to being a servant to the overall process, the value of the process, rather than thinking I was all that.
Yes, I could see how dealing with some of those other people cause you to open your eyes up and kind of maybe I need to step back a little bit.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so does everybody else who is an expert. I mean, this is the great move of humility. We're all in the service of our collective future. We're not in the service of our own positions. Our positions are only tools that give us opportunities, but we have to be really as Deb said, we have to constantly interrogate what our position tells us.
Yeah, put our ego to the side and put the work in the front. Yeah.
That would be a wonderful thing if everybody on this planet could figure out how to do that part.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. Well, guys, as the ACE framework expanded, what other communities and professions should be brought into this process, and who are the big groups that were not represented?
Such a good question. We describe this as a pilot project in many ways because this was a volunteer effort, and that means that the people who were willing. I got to tell you, if you work on climate or climate justice or an environmental justice, the number of opportunities you have to volunteer your time for well-intended projects that don't go anywhere is enormous, right? You can fill every day of every week with those. And so what was it that was going to compel people to participate in this and give this the kind of time and effort that made it so good? And the answer is that they trusted the people who invited them, and that the way it was organized was going to be legit, and the people inviting them were trustworthy, and so it naturally selected kind of a Deb, you know the name for this, but the kind of network of people who heard from others that they should participate and then invited others to participate is kind of a natural kind of, it creates a natural sort of community to do this work. That's very different than, let's say you were the president and you said, I want to invite leaders to come to Washington and under the authority of the White House to advise us on this work. You would get a different crowd. And so the people we didn't have the networks to attract were business, were a lot of like white rural communities were not well represented. The sciences were represented but could be represented more strongly. And so there are additional audiences who are stakeholders, just like we all are, who we think ought to be brought into these multi-sectoral dialogues in the future.
Yeah.
So you think?
Go ahead.
So you think the word of mouth approach is more effective than promoting or invitations?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not. It is the word of mouth, but it's the word of mouth through like networks of networks, and it's that idea of the trusted messenger, the trusted relationship of like working in relationship with each other. And I do think that in the long term of like sustained work, when there's not a grant in front of you, when there's not a giant funding opportunity through a foundation, what sustains the work is that commitment and accountability to each other because you're working in relationship with each other. And that idea is like not working or weaving are the metaphors that people use. But it is those organic leaders that, you don't necessarily see on their resume that they should be the person to connect with, but they are. They're the organizing sort of wonderkind of their community. And you find a lot of women in this space, actually.
You do.
And so, those are the folks that you really hold the fabric together of this type of justice work.
Yeah, I would also add that I think that invitations to convenings are also valuable. The thing about ACE that's really different, though, is that we would want to combine the kind of people you would get through those high-level invitations into dialogues with the people who were attracted to participate in this in the first place, who are much more at the grassroots level or local community level, because it's that collaboration and dialogue across those boundaries that are typically set aside. The people, I've been in small business forever, and when I make a statement, everybody says, yeah, but you're a small business guy, who cares? That's just you. That's just an anecdote. You don't represent anybody, right? That's kind of the politician's view of a small business owner. Whereas if I owned Exxon or Best Buy or Amazon and I spoke, they would listen to me because I represent 100,000 jobs or 50, whatever it is, right? So these positions intentionally need to be scrambled if we're going to all come to understand the potential we have to solve these problems together. That's what the ACE dialogues can do, and I think in the future that would be the way to make invitations really, really effective.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I definitely totally agree with that, because just because you're in charge of a large corporation don't mean you have all the brains in the world.
That's right. That's right.
Was ACE is a part of the Paris Agreement, and then I said you pulled out under Trump and now back in under Biden-Harris. I don't want to ask you why did that Trump pull out in the first place. I don't want to ask that.
Yeah.
I kind of got stuck there. So what do you guys think? Under Biden-Harris, you think that's going to make a difference?
I mean, I think it does make a difference, but I think even before the Paris Agreement, many, many years before the Paris Agreement back in 92, the framework, the UNFCCC, it had the original language for ACE in it. It had that language about education, training, public awareness, public participation kind of language in it. And that is something that has a long dimensions to it. So does the Biden-Harris administration make a difference? I sat on my couch after the Biden-Harris administration won the election, and I sobbed. I was so happy to have a change of administration, and yet at the same time, I also want folks to understand that this is not solely about politics. This is about our shared future. And if you are like super Republican in the middle of America, it's just as much about you, because it's about our shared future and how we come to understand in our local community what we all have to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think we're also learning that because of this ACE work, there are efforts underway to encourage its adoption in the White House and in the federal agencies in Washington. And we're discovering many of the ways that government is structured that make it very difficult to truly collaborate with communities. There are all kinds of rules around how the government is allowed to engage with the public and get advice from the public and so forth. And so a lot of what happens in government is top-down, right? They deliver knowledge to us. They deliver science products to us. They deliver advice to us. They deliver money to us in form of grants or investments or competitions for grants that you can't even apply for unless you have the infrastructure to figure out how to do the applications and all of that. And this work is already really robust in communities who want more sustained collaboration and support from the federal government and from the private philanthropic community that sustains this work over the long haul and builds upon it and expands it. And so it's a mixed bag. The challenges of doing real collaboration and getting the attention of leaders and helping them find ways to truly collaborate with community-level organizations and governments and so forth is an ongoing challenge. And having the Biden and Harris team in the White House is helpful, but it doesn't take the challenges away. And so I think that this is going to be this is going to require commitment and work from a lot of people to make the promise, to fulfill the promise of this agenda going forward. And it's good. It's what do they call it? Good trouble, right? This is good trouble to be involved with.
That's right.
So, do you think the Biden-Harris administration should create a national strategy, or did you guys already do that for them?
Yeah, right. Maybe that's what this is, and we just need to move on with implementation of it, and figure out in the next step, not so much making a plan that we have to then enact, but enacting things as we go and iterating and refining and making it better and expanding it to include some of those who haven't yet been included. And so I think what we even consider to be a plan has to also change. It has to be something that's a living, working, strategy for how we engage in climate action. Because honestly, I don't think that we have time to spend a year making a plan and then act. That's just not available to us anymore.
I totally agree with that. So where should you think the government should focus its efforts on the climate change?
I would say that they need to focus a lot on local level, because this is where people feel climate to be most powerful and most salient to them. And it's also where they feel that they can make a difference in their own lives. So that's a huge focus of it. And to his credit, Biden has said that he wants to engage more with communities and with state governments. So we don't yet know what that's going to look like, but those are good words to hear. Then there are things that only large organizations like the federal government can do. They can transform their procurement practices to include climate adaptation and mitigation training in the procurement process, to change the standards of, they're the biggest buyer, the biggest customer in the world, right? And they own enormous amounts of property that can be made more efficient and more climate adapted. And they can also invest in the kind of research and development that small entities cannot do. So there are roles to play for them, but those roles should really robustly embrace collaboration, more collaborative models. And they have pilot programs in community-level collaboration in some of the federal agencies. I know NOAA, for example, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, has some programs that are very successful, but also still so far very small. So there's a lot of opportunity. But I think that if they take care of the big things that only large organizations can do, and just take care of that stuff, and then really focus their attention on the local and state level and regional level, I think that we would change our national approach to climate. We could do it very quickly if we do that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, another good example of that is the work that's been done with the EPA, with the Environmental Justice for Tribes and Indigenous Peoples. There's been some excellent work in that area, but again, it's about heavily resourcing those folks who are already doing great work and helping them figure out how to do more work in regional areas and local communities.
Yeah, I still can't understand why a lot of these communities still don't have clean water.
Yep, that's right. And that's actually a really great point. What even constitutes climate action? Basic needs often need to be met well before that. But even meeting those basic needs is part of this, intersecting work of climate now. So, it's really about environmental and climate justice because, clean water in some spaces is about, how we solve that issue right in front of us and how we also think about the climate aspects as we solve that problem.
I wish we can get rid of a lot of these greedy civic leaders and political people. I was just thinking about, I was reading this thing about local towns and city and small businesses. I'm like, the government gave a lot of money to the SBA for small businesses, and the SBA has just been sitting on that money, haven't been providing the loans, and I don't understand that. And I asked one of my associates the other day, if they're not giving the people that qualify or can have these loans, what happens to all that interest that money collects while they're holding this money? Where does that go? And I still haven't got an answer for that. Where does that money go? I mean, you're not granting these loans, but you have millions and billions of dollars sitting there. Where does the interest off that money go? 'Cause I'm sure it's accruing interest somewhere. Where does that money go?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. And there are also lots of questions about who gets that money when they do start distributing it in terms of loans and grants. Because not everybody has the skills, the capacity to do it. And there are lots of businesses that, you go through the application process and you get 3/4 of the way through it, and then you find out there's for some reason you don't qualify. And so there's a lot embedded in that work that. But
that's Tom.
Needs to get sorted out.
Tom, that's if you have a computer and if you have internet
That's
access.
right.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly right. And if you have the time to figure out how to apply, which a lot of small business owners don't have. Yeah.
And that also brings up the idea that the other aspect of this that we've been discussing in a couple different spaces is even the structure of the application, is it asking for prior funding? Is it asking for types of privilege that are accumulated on a resume? Or is it really about, desettling and disrupting those types of things and actually making sure that the money hits where it's needed as opposed to who has the correct sort of credentials to get it, you know, because that's a justice issue too, about like, you know, who qualifies for what and what are you basing that on? And so trying to like change the people who make those systems so that they understand that when you ask for certain kinds of criteria, they're going to preference people who often are white or often are middle class who already have it and aren't the ones who really need the resources.
That's right.
Wow. Hey, Tom, that takes me back to he who created the game also made the rules.
That's right.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this work is really about disrupting who makes the rules. Because
right.
if you get the right group of people, a different group of people around the table making the rules together, you're going to have different rules and you're going to have different outcomes. And I think that's a lot of what this book and the ACE work that is the heart of it revealed, is that we don't just need to lobby to change rules. We need to lobby to change who's at the table making the rules.
Totally.
And that's
totally.
right, and that's the game. That's the game right there.
And those are the same people that's fighting by tooth and nail because they don't want to relinquish the power. Because once they do that, they know that some changes can come.
Yep,
that's true.
And I
so
think
guys,
we need more.
Go ahead, Deb.
Sorry, I think the last thought on that for me would be, like, we need more people who are in these like positions, like more white people. Frankly, we need more white people to like understand and own their own responsibility in changing these systems, and because you know this is our shared future, and it's just we are so intricately connected through our environment and through the changes we're seeing in it that justice has to be at the core of how we're changing things.
That's well put.
Well, we definitely gonna keep that thought in prayer, boy, because I see a whole bunch of weak, scary people, greedy people, and I just don't understand it. I mean, if they could get past those things or look in the mirror every day and ask themselves one question: what kind of man am I? Or what kind of woman am I? Maybe some change can start right there at that point, because it's really easy to say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with me, but it does. It has something to do with everybody.
Yeah. It really does. And, you know, I keep hearing Biden say climate is an existential threat. What does that mean? That means that our lives depend on it, right? And our kids' lives literally depend on it. That's what existential threat means. Our society depends on it, that we do something about it. And so the assumption that we can pivot from that statement to business as usual, to doing the same things that got us here, to having the decisions made by the same people who got us here, does that make any sense at all? No, it really doesn't. And so in addition to standing in front of the mirror and saying, what kind of person am I, it's like, what kind of situation are we really in? And does doing things the same way make any sense if it's not transforming the future for the better? And I think part of the, you know, you asked earlier what made this transformational, this project transformational. Well, it's that when you change the people who are at the table and you really listen to the people who've been brought to the table who weren't there before, holy cow, it's inspiring, you know. And it makes it easy to say, yeah, let's change the people at the table. Now, if I was a greedy local politician or national politician with a giant ego, I might not make that statement. But I think this kind of exposure to this work, though, can really be transformational.
And we definitely going to keep the message out there, because it definitely affects each and every one of us in more ways than one. I think I mentioned you once before, Tom, that I'm a fisherman, and I could definitely tell how it's affecting just on that level.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, an interesting point about that, Lamont, is that years ago I was sort of introduced to the National Wildlife Federation, which is a interesting organization of local chapters that includes, environmental activists and hunters and people who fish and conservatives and liberals, people who you don't normally think of as being in an organization together, because they all see, for a variety of reasons, they have different. They see changes in the environment that they're disturbed by, and they want to see stopped. And it's a real example of how, when you connect with people around the issues that they care about, it sort of doesn't matter what their political ideology is anymore.
Right.
And there starts to be common ground. And, that's one of the things that gives me hope, is that if we can focus more on that and less on this crazy horse race nonsense that we get in the media about who's, the left and the right are going at each other and who's up and who's down, we would be talking about the real work and not talking about this big distraction.
Well, I think that's what they like going, Tom, is a distraction, because as long as you hooked up in that ball of confusion and looking at the big distraction, you don't focus on the real issues. And
that's right.
Yeah.
That's part of the plan, that's part of the plan. Let's keep everybody confused and they don't see what's really going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they don't own their own power, their own power in their own communities to do the things that are needed and to make the choices that are needed to be made every day.
No, but
and it's also the news media trying to stir up controversy, because controversy sells ads, right?
Yeah, they're trying to keep their jobs too. I understand that, but can't you do that and be truthful?
Well, that would be nice. Right. That would be useful.
That would be really, really nice, wouldn't it? But listen, guys, we down to the last minute or so of the show, man. Time really did fly. But go ahead. I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to tell everybody where they can go get the book and how they can reach out for you.
Well, the book is available at online retailers like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, and so forth. It's called Empowering Climate Action in the United States, and it's short. It's a quick read. You can also read the framework that is Chapter 4 of the book for free at aceframework.us. That's a website, aceframework.us, where the central report in the book is posted.
And more things as they come available will be posted there. It's an ongoing effort. So definitely reach out through that website to the whole community.
Tom, Deb, did you guys do an audio book on this, or is it just strictly print?
We did not yet, but I think Tom should.
We might do it. We probably should do it. The publisher doesn't do audiobooks, so we might have to do it on our own.
Well, a shameless plug. We're a record company over here as well, so hey, don't forget us.
That would be awesome.
But anyway, I think that would be a great thing for you to do, Tom, especially since society is in this ball of confusion. It would be great for them to be able to put your book in their CD player or flash drive or whatever, and they could get all this information so they don't have no excuse from not sitting down and reading it. They could hear it.
There you go.
All right, it's a deal. Sold.
Well, thank
all right,
you.
guys, it's been fun. I definitely enjoyed you guys, and as always, the door's open. Come back anytime. I definitely love the message, and it's motivational, inspirational, and it's great to know people out there like yourselves that's doing some great work and trying to help humanity, because there's so many people out there trying to do the opposite thing. And I don't know how much it is between the ignorance and stupidity, but it seems like that line is getting washed away.
Yeah, I think it's that greed. It's that issue of greed that you named. So, yeah, we got to
I think you're absolutely right, Dr. Deb. I think you're absolutely right. Boy, they on this survival roller coaster, and they don't know how to get off. They don't know what to do, and it's just this big ball of confusion. But we're going to keep them in prayer and keep our eyes wide open and duck when we should.
Thank you so much. You stay safe and well.
I shall do the same. We do the same. Thank you guys for joining us. We definitely appreciate you. And for those that joined the show late, it'll be available in a couple minutes worldwide. And like I tell you every Sunday, ask your mama, ask your daddy, ask your neighbor across the street, the man at the gas station, at the corner, the people that work in the supermarket. Somebody should be able to tell you where to get this show. If not, you can always reach out to us at worldmovement.com, office number 323-957-7322, and we'll be able to direct you. So you got no excuses. We'll see you next week, same time. We appreciate you. And thank you guys a lot, Deb, Tom. We appreciate you, man. And you guys stay safe out there.
You too, Lamont.
Right.
Thank you.
All right,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.
Yeah, old school. That's what I'm talking about. Listen, this ain't for everybody. Some of y'all need to hear this. I know you're in the trenches fighting, but check it out. I'm going to put it down like this so I can help the saints understand. Everything you're going through is all part of the master plan. Or what? You thought because you got saved everything was going to be peaches and cream? You better wake up, son. Don't nothing come to a sleeper but a dream. Faith without works is dead. Read your Bible. You know what it says. He who don't work don't eat. Blackers don't get fed. Yeah, Jesus said he who puts his hand to the plow looks back the same ain't fit. Some of y'all ain't been in the trenches 5 minutes and you about ready to quit. I ain't mad at you. I'm just hitting you with the real. If you died for me and I was still tripping, now how you think that make you feel? Check this out. Deep game. This here's deep. Some of y'all ain't sawing nothing but you studied trying to reach. But unto him who is able to position fathers by his glory. Struggles might be part of your testimony, but it ain't the end of the story. Now the point is since it's prophesied way back in the day. Choir, sing your hook right here and see if the church can relate.
I know we can make it.
Oh, we can make it.
I know good and well. I can work it
He'll
out.
work it out.
Yes, we
Work
can.
it out.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, he'll work it out.
I know we can make it.
We can make it.
I know good and well. I can work it out. Yes, we can.
Yes, he can. Yes, he can. Yeah.
Thinking not strange, the fiery trials are to try you. You say, why you? But your church say, what would Jesus do? Why you asking if he ain't trying to do what he's saying? He told you he was going to have tribulations, but you thought he was playing. 1 minute you're telling how good God is and can't nobody beat the talk. The next minute you're backsliding so fast, look like you're moonwalking. Oh yeah, I'm preaching to myself because I ain't no better. It ain't like I've been following his every word, obeying it to the letter. But we soldiers, we got to remember that. Regroup, stay on point. Yeah, bow down, confess, repent, stay humble, let him anoint. It ain't easy as I thought it was. I'd be lying if I told you that. But it showed up getting better all the time. Trust me, that's the fact. Ain't nothing we going through that can't be handled. God put that on his son. Like they say, you can shout now if you want to, because the battle's already won. So while you're going through the valley, don't even trip. You're going to be on top. Choir, sing the hook line one more again. This time you don't stop.
I know we can make it.
We can make
I know good and well. I can work it out. Yes, we can.
Yes, he can. He'll work it out. We can
I know we can
make it.
make it. I know good and well.
Oh,
I can work it out.
yeah.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. If you let him, I know good and well he can work it out. Work it out. Work it out. Work it out. Work it out.
Oh, he'll work it out. Oh,
I know we can make it.
we
I
can
know good and
make
well
it.
I can work it out. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
He's gonna work it out
If
for
you
me.
let him, I know good and well he can work it out.
Blessed are the poor.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Blessed are those who mourn.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Blessed are the meek.
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness.
I know we can make it. I know good and well I can work it out. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. I know we can make it. I know good and well I can work it out. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Yes, we can. If you let him, I know good and well he can work it out.